Some more signings from the Buccaneers as they bring back a lot of their own. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. The Buccaneers bring in a couple of players at positions of need, and the disrespect of the Buccaneers starts early on this year. We're going to get to that coming up in a little bit, but let's start with a flurry of moves that the Buccaneers have made over the last day in regards to their own players. So the Buccaneers are bringing back quite a few of their own as they've agreed to a one-year deal with Greg Gaines, a two-year deal with Anthony Nelson, a one-year deal with Kyle Trask, a one-year deal with CJ Brewer, and a one-year deal with Daniel Griesiak. The big one here, obviously, is edge rusher Anthony Nelson, who gets 2 years, $10 million. Nelson has played in every game in 4 of the last 5 seasons, and he was a huge part of the rotation for the Bucs last year. He finished 2024 with 4 sacks, 13 quarterback hits, 40 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble. He had 3 sacks in 2023, 5.5 in 2022 to go along with a career-high 3 forced fumbles, and then 5 sacks in 2021. Evan and I discussed Anthony Nelson quite a bit, and we both kind of got the feeling that he was going to be able to get more on the open market than the Bucs were going to be able to pay. But it turns out they were able to get the deal done and keep him here as part of the new look edge rotation. This was a really, really good signing for the Bucs. Right now, their edge rotation is Yaya Diaby, Hassan Reddick, Anthony Nelson, and Chris Braswell. You need at least 1 or 2 more additions here, but in a pinch, let's say they don't bring in another free agent, they draft a edge rusher, in the upcoming draft in the first 2 days. In that situation, you could use Marquise Watts or Jose Ramirez as the 6th guy in that rotation as some depth. I was talking to some of the insiders about it. I'm no longer really optimistic or sold on Marquise Watts or Jose Ramirez. I think we've seen the best that they have to offer. They provide some depth, sure, that's fantastic. But if you're down to Watts or Ramirez being one of your starting edge rushers, you're probably not going anywhere anyway, because that would have meant that the entire position group was ravaged with injuries. I do still expect edge rusher to be a primary pick within the first 2 days of the upcoming draft, but it's really, really great that the Bucs brought back one of their better edge rushers from last season as they continue the development of Chris Braswell. They continue the development of Yaya Diaby, and then, of course, Hassan Reddick being the big name that they brought in for this season. And then the other signing that was really great, flew under the radar, was Greg Gaines. With the injuries along the defensive line last year, Gaines was very, very valuable as part of that defensive front. He was a guy that was part of the rotation, injury or not. He would give Vita Vea a breather. He would give Cansey a breather when they needed one. He played in 15 games last season, started 3 of them, and then played all 17 games and started 2 back in 2023. He had 1 sack in each season with the Buccaneers to go along with 2 tackles for loss and 4 quarterback hits last year. This is another really strong depth and rotational piece for the Bucs. And for all the problems that the defense had, their strength was along the defensive line. That was by far their best unit, and Gaines was a key contributor there. That was another guy that Evan and I talked about the Bucs probably not being able to bring back. He might have priced himself out, and the Bucs may not have been able to bring him back. Again, like Anthony Nelson, they get the deal worked out, and they may still add another defensive lineman, whether that's in free agency or in what's a really deep draft at the defensive tackle position. They also brought back CJ Brewer, who really grew last season, started to come into his own as a part of the rotation. So Brewer played in 12 games for the Bucs last year. He had 2 sacks as well as 2 passes defensed and 3 quarterback hits. He was on the field for 20% of defensive snaps last season over the course of those 12 games played, which was by far the largest workload that he has had in his career. Brewer bounced back and forth between the practice squad and the active roster before being called up and staying a member of that active roster in late September. That's another move that I really, really like. And I know some people are going to say, the defense was bad last year. Why are they bringing back the same guys that were part of a bad defense? Well, the answer is they're bringing back guys that contributed in a positive sense. They bring back 2 guys from the strongest unit of the defense last season, as well as one of their best rotational players at any position in Anthony Nelson, as part of a unit that needed an upgrade. That upgrade was Hassan Reddick. They do need to upgrade more. They do need to draft someone. I don't think there's anybody else out there on the edge market. They're not going to trade for Trey Hendrickson at this point. I would say that with 99.99% confidence. So you're still going to continue to look to upgrade that position, whether that's in the first round, the second round, the third round. There's going to be plenty of edge rushers that can come in and help out that rotation. But Nelson returning, that's a positive thing. There's a reason that the Bucs wanted him back, and they let Joe Tryon-Shoyinka walk and go to the Cleveland Browns. And then Kyle Trask returning on a 1-year deal. I'm not sure if the market wasn't quite what he thought it was going to be, or if he just decided that he would rather stay with a team that seems close to competing for a championship rather than going to be a backup somewhere else. But ultimately, Trask is back. It's one of those, maybe the devil is better than the devil that you don't. And I don't hate this. Look, if Trask is playing in multiple games, it's probably a bad sign for the Bucs. I think you can say that about probably, off the top of my head, 27, 28 NFL franchises. If the starting quarterback goes down for an extended period of time, they're probably in trouble. And so if Trask is out there starting 3, 4, 5 games, well, that means that Baker went down and the Bucs' chances to compete are probably slipping away anyway, unless it's a short-term injury and you're going to get Baker back. With that said, I like that he's been here for a while. This is going to be his 5th season with the Buccaneers. He knows the guys, they know him. If he has to go in and play some snaps or play a game, then there's going to be a history and some trust there from Mike, from Chris, from Cade, from the rest of that offense, because they've worked with him for so long. There's definitely something to be said about the chemistry that these guys have from being together over the course of the last 4 seasons, now going into a 5th. And I like this option better than bringing in someone from the outside, because honestly, the options on the outside weren't that great. I had an insider bring up Gardner Minshew to me as a potential Trask replacement before this signing happened. And I don't hate that, but I would rather have the guy here that already knows the offense. Grizzard's offense isn't going to be all that different from Liam Cohen's. Go ahead and keep the guy that's been here, that's developed a rapport, that has been a part of the locker room for the last 4 seasons. You saw a guy like Marcus Mariota, who reportedly had a pretty decent free agent market out there. He returns to the Commanders to back up Jaden Daniels. Tommy DeVito, they don't have a starter with the New York Giants. He goes ahead and he stays to be the backup there for whoever they bring in. Familiarity plays a big role for both sides. If you're not in the race for a starting job somewhere else, you might as well just stay where you are if you're going to be a backup quarterback. The key losses for the Bucs, obviously, Robert Hainsey went to Jacksonville to join up with Liam Cohen, and then Justin School heading to the Minnesota Vikings. Losing School is a huge blow. You are now without your top 2 backup offensive linemen, one that plays both tackle positions, and then one that can play across all 3 positions of the interior. So now you need a backup center. Unless you're going to cross-train Elijah Klein, You need a backup there that can fill in for Graham Barton if he goes down. And then you need reliable tackle depth, which is going to be hard to come by. It's going to be interesting to see how the Bucs address that. I would hate for them to burn some of this draft capital, as limited as it is, on offensive line depth when they still need another edge rusher. They need a linebacker. They need a corner. They need a safety. They need a wide receiver. Nothing the Bucs have done so far has changed their draft needs. It just might have rearranged the order of importance a little bit. But the Buccaneers did bring in some outside free agents at some of those positions of need. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, or youth sports like hockey, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, all one word, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So a couple of outside free agents coming to the Buccaneers. They signed cornerback Kindle, Vildor, and linebacker Anthony Walker. So Vildor was drafted in 2020 and will now be on his fourth team in 5 years. He's played for the Bears, Titans, and Lions before joining the Bucs this year on a one-year deal. And here's what I'm going to say about this signing. This is your Tavierre Thomas replacement. Thomas agreed to a deal with the Minnesota Vikings, but this is a player that's going to be a special teamer. If he is taking meaningful defensive snaps, things have gone very, very wrong. I am going to be brutally honest with you talking about this. When he was targeted over the course of the first 5 years of his career, he has allowed 63% of passes to be completed and allowed a passer rating of 115.1 over the course of his career. 13 touchdowns given up, 13.7 yards per completion. Not great. Not great at all. Now, as a special teamer, yes, fantastic. I'm all about it. I'm all in. Great. But much like when Tavierre Thomas was on the field on defense last year, bad things happened. It's the same thing here. This isn't the signing that signals that Jamel Dean is on his way out. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Vildor isn't threatening anyone's job in that cornerback room or on that defense. You, of course, need depth. You need guys that play special teams, but this one does not move the needle for me. This is very much just Tavierre Thomas part 2. That's really what it boils down to. I would rather they continue to develop Tyreek Funderburk, get him on the field some more. They still need to address corner. This is not the cornerback 3 that Evan was talking about on Wednesday's episode. That's not who this guy is. And honestly, the same kind of goes for Anthony Walker. So KJ Britt agreed to a deal with the Miami Dolphins. As a result, the Bucs agreed to a deal with former Dolphin Anthony Walker. They essentially just swapped teams, but they're the same player. And that's, again, I was actually arguing with my son about this. He's like, oh, the Bucs got an inside linebacker. I'm like, yeah, no, this is not the guy that's going to be starting next to Levante David. So Walker was drafted in 2017 by the Indianapolis Colts. He played with Baker in Cleveland in 2021, and he was with Miami last season. He finished with 68 tackles, no tackles for loss, 1 sack, 1 interception, 2 passes defensed on the season with the Miami Dolphins. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, ooh, sounds like this guy is way better in coverage than KJ Britt was, so that's an upgrade. Yeah, no. According to PFF, KJ Britt finished 83rd among 84 qualifying linebackers in coverage grade last season. Walker was 81st. So when I tell you that they're basically the same player, that's exactly what they are. Now, again, it's not always about the starters. You have to have depth across the board if you're going to make a run. You have to have players that can step up and take snaps if an injury happens. Walker has plenty of starting experience, 83 starts in 8 years. He started 8 games for the Dolphins last season, 12 games for the Browns in 2023. He started every game for the Indianapolis Colts in 2019 and 2020. So there is a lot of experience there. So as far as a depth signing, as far as a guy that you can rely on to go in and take some snaps if he's called upon, that's great. But this isn't the guy that they want to line up next to Levante as a starter in 2025. Maybe that's Servassier Depths. You know, we have yet to see. But it seems to me that this team is starting to trend towards drafting Jahad Campbell in the first round of the draft next month. Maybe they're looking to draft Jalen Walker, the Georgia linebacker that played inside and outside linebacker for the Bulldogs and prides himself on that. I talked about it on my Combine episode live from Indianapolis. That would give Todd Bowles a really, really interesting weapon, a guy that is versatile enough that he can bounce from the inside to the outside. You never really know what his assignment is going to be, adds a layer of difficulty of reading the defense for an opposing quarterback. So as much as I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer about these signings. They're important signings, but they are not the upgrades at the position that the Bucs need to take the next step and get to the next level. So these signings are not meaningless. So don't get me wrong there. Don't go on Twitter or whatever and say, oh, you know, Locked On Bucs was bashing these signings. These guys are going to suck. That's not what I'm saying. Just don't put too much stock into them outside of being depth or special teams contributors. So Walker's going to get his opportunity to take snaps at linebacker. You know, we're still looking for who's going to be the starter next to Levante David. But think back to how many snaps KJ Britt took in 2023 as a backup. Go back to how many snaps JJ Russell took at linebacker last season as a backup. They're bringing back Deion Jones. He got meaningful snaps on defense as a backup. You still need these reliable guys, but don't look at these signings as saying, oh, okay, we got our starter. We got our cornerback 3. That's not who these guys are. The Bucs hate and disrespect is starting well ahead of schedule. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's cutting down the nets. I don't think my Fighting Illini are going to make the same noise that they did last year, but right now, Duke is the favorite at plus 330, followed by Auburn at plus 380, then Florida at plus 750, and Houston at plus 850. The FanDuel app is super easy to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around for those winnings to show up. Boom, they are right there in my account. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Wrapping things up here on the Locked On Bucs podcast, and oh boy. So Colin Cowherd was on his nonsense on Thursday, just one day into the actual start of free agency, and Cowherd gave his playoff predictions for the NFC. He had the Eagles and the Commanders coming out of the NFC East with the Eagles winning the division. All right, cool, fine. That's chalk. He had the Lions and Bears in the NFC North. I'll get to that in a minute. He had the Rams and Seahawks in the NFC West. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute. But then in the NFC South, he had the Falcons winning the division and the Bucs missing the playoffs. Cowherd said, quote, "I believe in Michael Penix. The Bucs are getting old. They're bringing back the entire offense. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's not. But I like the trajectory of the Falcons, and I'm a big Penix fan." End quote. What in God's name are you talking about? The Buccaneers are the fourth youngest team in the NFL. They have 4 players, 4 over the age of 30. Vita Vea, Mike Evans, Levante David, and now Hassan Reddick. Baker is going to be 30 years old when the season starts. The Bucs' average age of their roster is 26 years, 10 months. The only teams in the league that are younger on average are the Green Bay Packers, the Denver Broncos, and the Los Angeles Rams. Then you want to talk about the trajectory of the Falcons and believing in Michael Penix? What has he shown you to believe in? He was terrible in his 3 starts last season. Below a 60% completion percentage. Had as many touchdowns as interceptions. He was sacked 4 times. What are we talking about? Then you want to continue to pump the tires of the Chicago Bears because they signed or traded for Pro Bowl offensive linemen. Okay. How is that going to make Caleb Williams an accurate quarterback? Because we all heard the hype last year. We all heard the Bears getting picked to go to the playoffs because of Caleb Williams and Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze, and he was garbage. If a pass was more than 5 yards away, he couldn't hit it. The Bears and the Falcons were both the hot, sexy picks of every pundit last year, and Caleb Williams was trash. I said it on the squad show. You know, we were talking on that show about, you know, which teams helped themselves the most in free agency, and everyone kept saying the Bears, the Bears, the Bears. How does that make Caleb Williams better when he's not a good quarterback? And then the insanity of picking the Seahawks? Why? Why would you pick the Seahawks to make the playoffs? Nobody even understands what they're doing. So Sam Darnold has one good year with one of the best receiving corps in the NFC and an incredible defense. And what now? Because he signed with Seattle after they traded away Geno, all of a sudden you're sending him back to the playoffs? Guess what? Jackson Smith-Njigba is not going to be able to do it by himself, and he's the only receiver on the team. He's not even in the same time zone as Justin Jefferson. And then you want to go on and talk about how easy of a schedule the Seahawks have? Like, what are we talking about? I look, I know what's actually behind this. And it's something I'm sure a lot of you are aware of as well. But Colin Cowherd loathes the very existence of Baker Mayfield. Absolutely despises him. And I don't always chalk up negativity towards the Bucs as people hating Baker, but Colin Cowherd legitimately hates Baker Mayfield's guts. He hated him throughout the entire draft process. He bashed him incessantly throughout his time in Cleveland. Could not wait for the I told you so stuff when Baker was in Carolina and Los Angeles. And now Baker's been on an absolute tear the last 2 years in Tampa, and Cowherd hates every second of it. He's a big fan of Penix because he's clueless about quarterbacks. Absolutely clueless. This guy wouldn't know a good quarterback if the quarterback chucked a football directly at his face. And honestly, he's pretty clueless when it comes to most things, but it's the most glaring anytime he talks about the NFL and the NBA. So go ahead, Colin. Go ahead. Over a month away from the NFL draft, 24 hours into the actual start of free agency, but let's pick playoff teams. Go ahead. Let's crown 2 quarterbacks in the NFC that have done absolutely nothing to prove that they are not only playoff caliber, but even above average, while ignoring the fact that Baker Mayfield was top 4 last year in most quarterback metrics. And then the cherry on top of all of it, of showing that you have absolutely no earthly clue what you are talking about when your mouth just starts spouting out nonsense, is call the Buccaneers old. Say that they're getting old when they are the 4th youngest team in the NFL. So I can promise you this. Baker Mayfield heard that. Jason Light heard that. And it just adds to the bulletin board material that this franchise thrives off of. They love this kind of stuff because the more you continue to count them out, the more they set out to prove you wrong. And you really want to make the chip on Baker, on his shoulder bigger? You really want to do that? Because he hasn't shut enough of you up over the last 2 years? All right, go ahead. All of you listening and watching to this show, you're going to reap the benefits because you're the ones watching the Bucs win on Sundays. So I cannot wait to bring this video back up in about 8 months. It's saved. It's locked and loaded. I got it stored away. And we're going to revisit these absolutely asinine and abysmal takes when the games are actually being played. So we can go, yep, Colin Cowherd continues to prove that he has absolutely no freaking clue what's really going on. That's going to do it for this episode. Please make sure that you are following on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Follow along with everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.